I've had more success with the intensive garden than any of the other family-sized gardens that I'm trialing as part of this Red Gardens project, with the exception of the polytunnel garden, of course. A big reason for this is I've been able to learn from the experiences of others, as variations of this intensive methodology have been a core focus of small-scale organic growing for several decades. Much of this can be traced back to the work of John Jebbings and the grow bio-intensive method that he detailed in his book, How to Grow More Vegetables. More recently, these methods have evolved, especially within the urban agriculture movement, but the main focus remains how to get as much food out of a limited space as possible. I see this intensification as a process where resources and work that would normally be used to grow vegetables in a wider area are instead focused within a significantly smaller garden. The aim is to get more out of that limited space, and I've found that concentration of resources and effort has definite benefits, but is not without its problems. One of the core methods advocated by Jevons is to double dig fixed planting beds, but it seems that many people have shifted to less invasive and easier methods to cultivate the soil. A big part of this is the desire to limit the damages to soil biology and to make the task of managing the gardens easier. I think the shift has a lot of validity, but I have continued to double dig this intensive garden, in part to better understand the effects that it would have in the long term. I am also intrigued by the possibilities that looser and more friable soil can make it a lot easier for plants to grow, and that digging compost deep into the bed can substantially increase the depth of topsoil. While digging, I come across a few worms, but not as many as I'd like, given their vital role in soil health. And fewer worms is probably a sign that there is less of a wide range of other soil biology as well. But I have come to realize that there are still vast numbers of worms and other soil organisms actively working as part of this garden, only they're concentrated in the compost pile, where most of the decomposition of organic matter takes place. The plants may be missing out in some way by not being directly associated with the biological diversity that is involved in this decomposition, nutrient cycling, and formation of humus. But hopefully most of the benefits of these essential processes is passed into the garden soil with the finished compost, especially with the huge volume that is added each year. My experiences with the no-dig garden have shown that there are real benefits to not cultivating the soil and enabling the decomposition of the organic matter on the garden beds. But the intensive garden also works really well, I think mainly because of the loose and highly fertile soil, even if it is less biodiverse. I've been able to grow great vegetables using both of these diametrically opposed methodologies, and I find that really interesting. I think that the negative impact of the digging is far outweighed by the amount of compost that I can integrate. In recent seasons, I have added as much as 3,000 litres of finished compost to this 100 square metre garden, or about 30 wheelbarrow loads, producing a layer about 45 millimetres deep if spread over all of the fixed beds. That is a lot of fertility on organic matter, and way more than can be generated and decomposed within the garden itself, and a lot more than would be normally added to a vegetable garden. The other big part of this intensive methodology is to take advantage of the increased soil fertility and depth by spacing plants much closer together. There is often double the density of plants compared with other gardens, and this has generally worked out quite well. But it has been a problem with some plants, especially larger brassica varieties, which get really tall and fall over the beds, and resulting in reduced yields, and I have difficulty accessing parts of the garden. There is this idea that close plant spacing shades out weeds, although I found that weed pressure tends to be greatest earlier in the season, when many of the crops are just too small to make a difference. But the close spacing of plants means that weeding generally needs to be done by hand, so ends up taking a lot longer than with some of the other gardens. Another proclaimed benefit of this plant density is that more of the ground is shaded, reducing evaporation and keeping the soil cool. But this isn't such a big issue in Ireland because we normally have more rain than we need, and the soil is often too cool for ideal growth. Another focus of this intensive approach is to try to get a succession of crops growing in most of the beds each season, but I've had difficulty with this for a number of reasons. Succession cropping relies heavily on transplants rather than on direct sown seeds, but I've not been great at looking after seedlings or keeping them healthy. I also don't have enough experience or focus to consistently have seedlings ready to transplant in the ground as soon as the previous crop is harvested. This is often compounded by weather, which often seems to turn cold and windy just when I want to move the tender plants out of the protection of the polytunnel. This is especially the case when trying to plant earlier in the season, and I increasingly need to use season-extending fleece or other crop covers. We also can't rely on decent weather in the autumn, and many crops planted later have trouble maturing before the harsh winter weather sets in. All of this would really benefit from more extensive temporary protection at both ends of the season. While I am getting better at adapting methods for growing different crops and keeping the beds full most of the time, I unfortunately tend to run out of steam or lose focus later in the summer and don't always keep on top of everything. All of this digging, the extra fertility, the close spacing of plants, and the succession of crops really does result in higher yields. I harvested almost 400 kilograms of a wide range of vegetables last year, and it looks like I could get more than 500 kilograms from this 100 square meter garden this season. This is a lot of food for a family, and it's substantially more than I've been able to harvest from the extensive or the no-dig gardens. As one extreme example, a crop of parsnips last year was huge, both in terms of the size of each root and the 20 kilograms harvested from the 1 square meter of growing bed, about 4 times the yield from the other gardens. Of course it is more work, so while the yield is higher, the yield per hour work seems to be surprisingly similar to the other gardens. I anticipate that this intensive gardening method will continue to be one of the most productive methods that I'm trialing, but then again, that is the main objective. There are a few things I'm looking at refining over the next few seasons. I suspect that the soil in this garden would benefit from adding other amendments in addition to the general compost, but for this I would need to do another soil test. I plan to experiment with different varieties of some vegetables, which may be more appropriate to the methods of this garden. I also need to get better at caring for transplants, and to find ways to improve my timing for crop succession. I am hoping to try out different types of cold frames and other forms of protection to create better growing conditions at the beginning and at the end of the season. The aim is to really push this intensive garden, more so than the other gardens, to see how much food I can get out of this limited space, while keeping an eye on the resources and effort that this would take. And to figure out how this can be done without reducing the resilience of the garden too much, or compromising the quality of the vegetables that are produced. This intensive garden is one of 7 family-scale gardens that I'm trialing as part of the Red Gardens project, which are the focus of many of the videos on this YouTube channel. Up until now, all this work has been largely voluntary, but I'm going to need to start getting some kind of funding if I'm going to continue the development of these gardens and to produce many more videos like this one. This is where my Patreon page comes in. If you'd like to support me in this exploration, please follow the link here or in the description below to find out more about becoming a patron. Patreon pledges are a lot like compost. The more I get, the more I'll be able to share from these gardens in the future. But for now, thanks for watching.